So, this happened just the other day, and honestly, I'm still a bit baffled by the whole thing. I live in this pretty quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people actually wave when you pass by, and the loudest thing you usually hear is a lawnmower on Saturday mornings. But last week, that piece got punctured in a way I definitely wasn't expecting. See, my next door neighbors, Lisa and Mark, well, they're not exactly what you'd call quiet. I mean, before this, I'd mostly just heard laughing or the usual friendly chatter drifting through the thin walls. But then, out of nowhere, one evening I hear this sharp argument. And I don't mean a little disagreement like who forgot to put the trash out or something. I mean something that sounded like it belonged on one of those reality TV shows. It started with Lisa's voice, which normally is mostly cheerful and bubbly, except this time, she was absolutely tearing into Mark with this unfiltered intensity that caught me completely off guard. I couldn't make out all the words, but I certainly caught the vibe. It wasn't just a little fight. It felt like the kind of explosive showdown you only see when resentment has been bubbling under the surface for way too long. And here's the really awkward part. I was sitting right next to the shared wall, trying to focus on a book, maybe half paying attention to the background noise. Suddenly, everything goes from quiet suburban evening to, are we sure this isn't scripted? Real fast. There was yelling, slamming, and Lisa's voice getting almost desperate at some points. It was loud enough that I was pretty sure anyone walking by outside would have stopped just to listen. I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Like, why was this usually cheerful, chatty Lisa suddenly channeling her inner reality star? And Mark's responses? They were just as intense, but more defensive? Sighing, snapping back, lots of frustrated, you don't understand me kind of stuff. I kept thinking, okay, this must be some huge thing, but at the same time, it was so completely unlike what I ever expected from these two. They usually kept things lighthearted and fun when I saw them around. So, to hear all this tension pouring through the wall made me feel like I was eavesdropping on someone else's entire life. What really threw me was how personal it sounded. It wasn't just two people arguing about dishes or the thermostat. It felt layered, messy, real. And honestly, it made me want to stay as far away from the whole drama as possible, but somehow I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. So yeah, that night was sort of the beginning of a very unexpected and honestly kind of awkward chapter. Because what started out as accidentally overhearing a fight didn't just end there. It pulled me in deeper than I ever imagined. And, well, that's where the story really begins. I guess I should probably introduce myself properly since, well, I'm the silent guy living next door. Hey, if I don't see you, I won't bother you. My life basically revolves around work, a stack of half-finished books, and a pretty reverent silence that I, cherish more than most things. You know, the kind of person who enjoys their own company, keeps the lawn trim so it doesn't draw attention, and never really gets involved in neighborhood gossip. I'm that background character who blends into the beige paint and stays out of the spotlight. So, when I first heard all that noise coming from Lisa and Mark's place, it genuinely shook up my usual calm. And, not in the nice, hey, let's spice things up kind of way. More like a, what fresh chaos is this kind of way. Lisa and Mark, they're basically the opposite of me. Lisa's this whirlwind wrapped in smiles and rapid-fire stories, the kind who'd pop over just to borrow sugar and leave you with 3 updates about her cat's mood swings and her new obsession with scented candles. Mark, on the other hand, is the equally loud, slightly more rough around-the-edges counterpart with a knack for grilling in the backyard and talking about his fantasy football team like it's a national crisis. Together, they make this duo that you could spot from a block away just by the sound of their laughter or their arguments, which, as it turns out, are a bit more frequent and theatrical than I'd ever guessed. On the surface, from the few polite hellos exchanged over the fence or quick nods as we collect mail, their relationship felt like your typical suburban dynamic, busy, sometimes messy, but nothing too wild. But honestly, that night I heard, well, that was on another level. It was the kind of yelling that made me suddenly very aware of just how thin these walls are. I kept wondering, how does a couple that seems to laugh so much manage to spiral into those kinds of fights? And more importantly, why do I know every expletive without actually wanting to? Now here's where things get a little awkward because my quiet life? Yeah, it wasn't supposed to collide with their storm of chaos. I planned to keep to myself, avoid any drama, and just enjoy my peaceful Saturday mornings with a cup of coffee and the occasional jog around the block. But sometimes, life doesn't really ask if you're ready for the kind of entanglement it throws at you. And somehow the volume turned up from, oh no, not my problem, to, why am I now emotionally invested? Faster than I could say privacy please. I'm still trying to figure out how the guy who says 2 words a day ended up caught in Lisa and Mark's whirlwind of loud arguments and even louder personalities. But I guess when you live next to a couple who treats every conversation like a season finale, it's kind of hard to stay completely out of it. So, yeah. Here I was, a guy who wore silence like a favorite sweater, sliding headfirst into a mess that was anything but quiet. And honestly, it all started with that one impossible to ignore evening of shouting through the walls. From that moment on, my peaceful little bubble was definitely burst. A couple of nights after that explosive argument, there was a sudden firm knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not with the kind of urgency that made it clear this wasn't a casual hello. I opened it to find Lisa standing there, cheeks flushed, eyes shining with that frantic mix of frustration and something else I couldn't quite place. Vulnerability? Hey, she said like she'd barged into my quiet world without warning. Can I come in? I just really need to talk. I blinked. Me? The guy who's mastered the art of polite nodding from behind closed doors? The one who carefully avoided neighborhood dramas like they were bad scents wafting through the air? I'm okay, but I just need to get some things off my chest, Lisa added, stepping inside before I could even answer. I barely had a chance to process it before she plopped down on my worn-out couch, exhaling like she was carrying a suitcase full of stress. At first, I hesitated, thinking about how I should probably tell her that venting sessions weren't really me. But then, watching her twist her hands nervously and spill out the tangled mess of their fight, Mark's stubbornness, their miscommunication, the weight of things unsaid, I found myself nodding along like I suddenly knew exactly what she meant. You don't have to say much, she said after a few minutes, just listen. So I did. And weirdly enough, it felt natural. Not like I was stepping into someone else's drama, but sitting shoulder to shoulder with a person who just needed a quiet place to unload. That's when I should have politely handed it back to Lisa, maybe suggested she call a counselor or friends who are less reclusive, but before I could get those words out, the doorbell rang. Mark. Instantly, the quiet feeling evaporated. Lisa shot me a look like, can you help? I opened the door, and there he was, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. Hey, Mark said, voice low and suspicious. Everything okay in here? Lisa leaned over, voice whispering. Mark's been on edge since last night. I think he suspects I'm talking about him. Well, I can't exactly say this is my usual Friday night, I muttered, feeling like the asterisk in their story, part bystander, part unwilling participant. Mark's gaze flicked between us, and I swear I could see the gears turning, the suspicion growing into a sort of reluctant acceptance. Look, if you're gonna listen, might as well hear me out too, he said after a beat, stepping inside. What followed was a back and forth that was less argument and more emotional volleying. And suddenly, I was smack dab in the middle, dodging and catching stories of frustrations and attempts to understand each other better. It was exhausting and intense, like being pressed into a game you didn't know the rules to but couldn't quit because stopping now would just make everything blow up worse. The more this went on, the clearer it became that they weren't used to having a neutral party around. I wasn't a therapist or a mediator, just the quiet neighbor who'd accidentally become the unofficial ear for their storm. And as much as I wanted to retreat back into my comfortable silence, I found myself wondering if turning away now would make things worse. But amidst all the tension and the heavy conversations, some small moments kept popping up. Lisa shooting me a grateful smile, or Mark admitting in his rough way that maybe they could do better. It was messy, awkward, and totally out of my comfort zone. By the time they left that night, I was left with a jumble of thoughts. Was I really helping? Or just adding fuel to a fire I wasn't equipped to put out? And maybe most unsettling, had I crossed an invisible line I wasn't ready to face? I closed the door behind them, the quiet of my apartment suddenly feeling a little different. Less like a sanctuary and more like a front row seat to a drama far louder than I'd ever imagined. And honestly, I wasn't sure what came next. After that night, things didn't exactly go back to the usual quiet hum of suburban normal. Instead, Lisa started popping over more often, not with her usual burst of energy and small talk, but with moments that felt different, more genuine, if that makes any sense. Like she'd finally found someone she trusted to share the messy bits with, even if that someone was the guy who never had much to say. I realized pretty quickly that my role had shifted. I wasn't just the silent neighbor anymore. Somehow, I'd become someone Lisa felt comfortable confiding in, the person she counted on to listen when Mark was off in his own world or when she needed to untangle her thoughts out loud. It was unexpected and, honestly, kind of intimidating. Because while I was happy to listen and it felt nice to be needed, I wasn't sure I was cut out for the part of confidant. What did that even mean for me? For them? One afternoon, Lisa knocked again, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, her signature nervous smile in place. She settled onto my couch like she was dropping off a heavy backpack she'd been carrying all day. I don't know if I'm helping or just making it worse, she murmured, staring at her mug like it held all the answers. Mark and I, we keep going in circles. Sometimes I think if you weren't here, I'd have just lost it completely. I shrugged, feeling the familiar awkwardness creep in. I'm not sure I'm much help, I said honestly. More like a wall for your storms, she laughed, a little breathless, and said, a very patient wall. That moment struck me. Maybe that was the thing I could be: steady, patient, someone who doesn't try to fix things but just holds space while others do the hard work. It wasn't glamorous and certainly not something I'd planned for, but it felt meaningful. Of course, there were questions I couldn't shake. Like, where do you draw the line between being a caring neighbor and getting pulled too deep? At what point does listening become something more complicated? And honestly, sometimes I still wonder if I'm more a cause of confusion than clarity for them. I mean, who just walks into a neighbor's house after a fight and ends up part of their emotional tsunami? But then there are moments when Lisa looks at me with that quiet relief, or when Mark drops his usual guarded act just long enough to say, "Thanks for being here," and the little knot of doubt loosens. I guess the whole thing made me rethink how we think about neighbors, how easy it is to write people off as just background noise or passing faces. Sometimes, accidental friendships form in the most unexpected ways, tangled up in loud arguments and midnight confessions. And maybe the awkward middle ground between too involved and not involved enough isn't such a bad place to be. So yeah, I'm still figuring it out. If I really helped Lisa and Mark or just added another layer to their complicated relationship, I don't know. But I do know that their chaos pushed me out of my quiet corner, and that, in its chaotic, loud, and rather messy way, feels worth it. And maybe, just maybe, that's what being part of a neighborhood is all about: accidental messes and friendships wrapped into one.